Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We are here at the Big Sky Resort at the 9th Judicial Circuit Conference. And my name is Paul G. Rosenblatt, Senior Judge from Prescott, Arizona. And it is my honor to have a conversation with Judge Murguia, who is the judge on the 9th Circuit. Good afternoon, Judge.
Good afternoon, Peachy. I hope you'll call me Mary throughout
All
this.
right, let's do it that way.
Okay.
The more informal, the better.
Yes.
Well, how nice of you to join us to have this conversation. I guess we'll start off with asking you the basic questions. When and where were you born, Mary?
Well, I was born in Kansas City, Kansas in 1960.
And you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I'm the seventh of 7 kids, but I have an identical twin who is number 6, and I'm 6 minutes younger than she is, but I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters.
We'll talk about them more as we go along because you have a very distinguished family.
Oh, thank you very
background.
much.
Tell us a little bit about your parents. Their names?
My parents are Alfredo and Amalia Murguia. They spent most of their lives in Mexico, in the state of Michoacan, a very small town called Tangancicuaro. But my dad was actually born in the United States, in Oklahoma.
I see.
His family had come to Oklahoma, and he, I think, attended until probably around the 5th grade when the Great Depression came, and they thought they might fare better going back home to Mexico because of how difficult life was in Oklahoma during the Depression. I'm sure it was difficult everywhere, but so they went back. And then he returned to the United States towards the end of World War II to register for the war. He'd gotten notice, and he came. That time we came, they didn't need him, and so he decided to look around and see maybe if he should come and maybe immigrate to the United States.
Do you know much about his family?
Just a little, yes, we do know some about his family. He was from a very large family. He was the oldest boy of 12 kids. And his father passed away at a very young age. He was in the 8th grade, and so he had to leave school and work to help his mother support the rest of the family. And he did go to work for a shopkeeper there and rode a horse to go and deliver goods, and he was kind of the did everything at the shop there in that small town. And then he came to the United States, and he decided that maybe he should explore getting a job in the United States and maybe send money back to his family, that he might be able to make more money over in the United States. And he knew he was born in the United States, but he didn't have his birth certificate. And so when he came to the United States, he didn't know how to show that he was born in the United States, and he'd actually got picked up by an officer in Texas and taken to court because he didn't have papers. And he told the judge that he was born in Oklahoma, but he didn't have any proof of citizenship. And he said that judge let him go and said, "Well, if you come back and show me your papers, I'm going to let you go." And so he couldn't believe, I'm sorry, so soon to get so emotional, but that was a compelling story for us growing up, because he said that judge was fair. He took my word, and he let me go and get my proof of citizenship. He went and got a baptismal record from the church where he was baptized, and that was sufficient for the judge to say, okay. It was curious because the judge let him go, and then my dad went back to show it.
Right.
And so on a couple levels, it was important lessons.
Oh, yes.
Of fairness.
Very important.
Yes.
They were both doing the right thing.
Doing the right thing. And so he ended up settling in Kansas City. He was on his way to Chicago, where some, like a lot of other immigrants during that time, and always that's what's happened. You go where people you know, and people from his small town had settled in Chicago, but they'd also were some in Kansas City. And he stopped in Kansas City, and he ended up staying there. He got a job first at an ice plant, and the folks in my neighborhood where I grew up, your dad either worked for the railroad or for the steel plant or the meat packing company. And my dad ended up working for the steel plant and steel mill for over 35 years.
Wow. And how about your mother?
My
Her
mother
family?
comes from a very large family. She's the oldest of 15. Her mother passed away when she was about 13. And my grandpa, there were 6. The youngest one was still a baby. She hadn't quite gotten, it wasn't even a year old, and my grandpa remarried, and then he had 10 more kids. She was, so she had 15 brothers and sisters. Yeah, there were 16. And he had 10 more kids, and so she comes from a very large family, but she married very young. Her first husband was killed, and some disturbance. I mean, it seems like it was the Wild West in the small town. There was some disagreement, and her husband was shot and killed in the plaza. And she had my oldest sister, Martha, and then my dad and she had gone to school together, but they married. And so when my dad ended up settling in Kansas City, he sent for them to come from Mexico, for Martha and my mom to come and join him. They had gotten married, and they were going to sort of start their life in the United States, in Kansas.
Wow. Do you still have contact with any of that extended family?
Very much so. We were really fortunate, and I feel that even stronger today, that they made great sacrifice so that every summer or every other summer we would go back to Mexico.
All of you?
All of us in a station wagon every summer, every other summer. It depended. And it was 9 of us in a station wagon driving 3 days from Kansas to Tangancicuaro, Michoacan, Mexico. And it was in the summer, so it was really hot. We didn't have air conditioning in the station wagon. We were really loaded down. And those were remarkable trips. We remember those quite fondly. And as a result of that, we know a lot of our family in this small town, and because they had such large families. And so I remember when I had my first job with the U.S. government, when I became a federal prosecutor, Department of Justice, I had to do a background check. They had to do a background check. You're familiar with that. And I had to list all my foreign-born relatives. And they wanted aunts and uncles and first cousins. I have 92 first cousins. So I asked the FBI agent, I said, do you really want all of my... And he's like one of those, he goes, yeah, I want everything. He didn't even let me finish. I said, but I have, he goes, put them all down. So I'm like, sheets and sheets. And he's like, what is this? I said, you said you wanted all my first cousins. So,
there they are.
But we're very fortunate. My parents were really, it was really important for them. I mean, family was important to them. And I think knowing and appreciating where we came from was important to them. They knew we were all, except for Martha, born in the United States, and that they wanted us to have a love of this country, without a doubt. But they also wanted us to know where they came from, you know, what our roots were, and to have appreciation for, you know, that. And I'm very grateful to that. So after growing up till we were in college, my parents, once they were able to retire, built a house down in Tangancicuaro, and they'd go down there for, 3-4 months, sometimes longer, and we would go down and visit them. So we have a pretty close relationship
Wonderful.
To all of the family members still.
That's most unusual, I
Yes.
think, in today's world.
Yeah. And many have come to the United States. A lot of our cousins are in California and throughout the United States. But all of their roots go back to that same town. And oftentimes we won't see them in the United States. We'll see them back there.
Sure.
So.
Well, obviously, your family was very interested in education and advancement. Tell us, did you all go to school then in Kansas City? Different
Yes.
times, obviously.
Thanks for that question, PG, because, you know, it's clear that education was really important to my parents. I think that was one of the reasons, you know, they came to this country. In Mexico, you're only allowed to go to school until, you know, the 8th grade. After that, if you want to go to school, you have to either pay to go to a private school, or you have to make sure your grades are strong enough that you get allowed to go into school. At least it was during the time that they were telling us this. And my dad saw right away that, you know, education was sort of leveled the playing field here. You know, if you could pursue education and do well, that you could do well here. You could really actually, you know, do well here. And so that was really important to them, I think. But it wasn't that they said to us, you know, if you get an A, I'll give you $1. One, he couldn't afford to do that. But it was just how they talked about it, how they treated
Just
it.
an attitude.
An attitude, how they
told you-
treated a book.
Right.
You didn't see books in our houses just anywhere. And we didn't have a particularly nice house growing up. It was very modest home. But books had a special place. And, you know, one of the first things that if my dad could afford it, he really couldn't afford it, but at that time when we were little, all of us, you know, he never met with salespeople. But this one day, you know, we all remember this, all my siblings do. He met with this salesperson, and it was the World Book Encyclopedia man. And my dad, you know, we're like, why is Dad talking to this person? What is he selling? Because for my dad to sit down and talk to him. And my dad figured out a payment plan to purchase a set of Britannia World Book Encyclopedias and made a shelf for him and told us, these I think are going to be, or may be helpful to you. And, you know, we used them actually quite a bit growing up. I mean, it's for us, and that's the older day internet, you know. And so when we didn't know what something was when we were in school, we went and looked it up in encyclopedia. And so that was, I think, you know, all that led into education. We were fortunate that we had a good public school system. I think if my mom had her way, we would have all attended Catholic school, but they couldn't afford it. But my dad was a strong believer in the public education system. He just thought, you know, no, schools here are really good, and we should just, you know, just let them go. And so we all were in school, and, you know, when I was in college, when I first started my year, because I had a twin sister, stair-step brothers, you know, there were 5 of us in college all at the same time. And 6 of us have post-education secondary degrees.
I'm sure you were accomplished enough to get some scholarships.
Well, that was the only way, really, we could have done it. My dad was a steel mill worker. He never made more than $35,000 his whole life. A year, you know, $35,000 a year. And there's just no way we would have done it, especially if you have 5 kids at school. So what was key were financial aid, you know, BEOG grants, basic educational opportunity grants that they offer, scholarship, and work study programs. That's how we made it through. We were fortunate that we had those resources available to us, and we worked really hard, and we knew that, you know, we need to keep our grades up if we were going to get the scholarship in order for all of us to get through, and so we did. And so it was really a remarkable time, you know, for, you know, folks, like,
Sure.
you know, my parents,
Right.
for their kids to be able to pursue, you know, education. My oldest brother, Ramon, was the first in our community, because we grew up in a Spanish-speaking neighborhood. It was all people from, a lot of them from the same small town my parents were from. And my brother Ramon was the first in our family and in our community to attend Harvard Law School. That was a big deal.
This was the first son?
Mo, he's the one right above us.
I see.
But my oldest brother, Alfred, had gone to the University of Kansas. My sister, Rosemary, went to the community college. And then my brother, Carlos, went to the University of Kansas. My brother Ramon started off 2 years at the community college, then went to the University of Kansas, and then got accepted to Harvard Law School. I tell that story to kids, especially these young Latino kids,
Sure.
because a lot of them are looking at community colleges, and some of them struggle whether they should go to community college or not. And I'm just like, get education whichever way you can, and if you do well,
Just keep at it.
you
Yes.
can build on it. And my brother, Ramon, is the best example, and he's done a lot. I mean, we've all kind of sort of drifted to public service. Then my sister Janet and I ended up going to the University of Kansas as well.
Was he the motivation for law school? Well, let's go back.
Okay.
Did you both go to the University of Kansas?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And Janet and I, when we first went to the University of Kansas, it was really an interesting experience for us because it was, it's about 30 to 35,000 kids. It's a college town. It's rich basketball history there, legacy.
We've talked about that
yes,
many times.
but we're all proud Jayhawks now. But Jay and I, when we first got to college, when they showed us our room, we ended up getting a room, and they put us together. And the residential dorm person there, our RA, our residential assistant, showed us our room, and we both looked in. I mean, it was just a regular dorm room, but it had a bed there, dresser, a desk, and the whole thing. And so Jay and I looked around, and then Janet asked, how many other girls are going to be in here with us? And she said, well, it's just the two of you. And we said, the two of us? Because it seemed like enormous. We lived in a really small house
Yes, sure.
with 9 people.
Right.
We shared one bathroom.
That's right.
And it was the first time we were going to have our own bed. I mean, we shared a bed the whole time till we were in college. It's a little embarrassing, but it's the truth.
Oh, that's...
And to have our own desk, to have our own dresser, it was remarkable. And so when she walked out the door, we said, okay, thank you. We high-fived, we hugged each other. We just thought, wow, this is what this country's all about. This is what, education's all about. I mean, if you can work hard, you can get a room and then you can go to school. And we took a little transistor. The girls were coming in from all over, and they were all complaining about how small their room was and how their stereo wasn't going to fit. They had this big stereo. We had a little transistor radio. We put it up on the, dresser there. And I guess it's just, your perspective. We were so grateful.
You thought you'd died and gone to heaven,
Absolutely.
and they were complaining.
Yeah.
Right.
It was something.
And what did you major on? Major in?
Journalism, but also Spanish. We were able to, both of us did the same thing. It's a little embarrassing, but those were our interests, and we were very interested in journalism. And then we were able to test out a lot of the basic Spanish, but we were really interested in learning about Spanish literature and some of the getting more advanced Spanish in terms of the language and learning about it. And so I ended up double majoring. I got a Bachelor's of Arts in Spanish and a Bachelor of Science in Journalism.
And by now, Ramon is out of law school, or?
No, he's just he's just a year older than we are, and Carlos is just 2 years older than we are. And so Carlos, when we entered, Carlos was just graduating law school when we were about to enter law school, and Ramon was at Harvard Law School.
So the law school future was already implanted there.
It wasn't. I mean, certainly, and I strongly believe that when you come from families where no one's gone to college, it really makes a difference to get that first kid in. I mean, whatever kid, because then the other kids are likely to follow. And it doesn't matter if you're from a Latino family or Anglo family or whatever kind of family.
That's for sure.
I think that's very impactful. It's very powerful. If sometimes it's the oldest, but whatever kid, usually the other ones, it's gonna increase their percentage of wanting to go to school and then being able to go into college. And I think that was true for our family. My brother Alfred went to college first. He was the oldest in our family. Rosemary went to college after that. And then Carlos went, and then Ramon, and then Carlos went on to law school, and so then it's like, well, that's possible, and so Ramon went to Harvard, and then after school, Jan and I weren't sure what we wanted to do, and I think we just saw it as a noble profession and a profession that might help in whatever we decided to do. I mean, it would be good to have a law degree. And I think we'll circle back a little bit now to that whole experience that my dad had with the judge and, about what was the right thing to do. And I just thought, well, having a law degree, I think, empowers you when you see, a wrong to help hopefully make it right and to enable you to do the right thing, not just for yourself but for others. And so even though it was a very subtle story at the time, I think it was very impactful for us later on and kind of in the recesses of our mind stayed there. And, along with everything you're exposed to, I'm a big To Kill a Mockingbird fan and, you see those, you read about that. I guess that's one thing I'd also like to highlight with PG because what was important, I think critical for our family, for me, was the Carnegie Library that was set up post-World War II. Andrew Carnegie is this great philanthropist.
Right. We had one in Prescott, Arizona.
Yeah, and so we had one a block, from where we lived, literally a block. It's beautiful. It's a historic building. And it's been on the historical register now for a long time, but that's where we went to. And Andrew Carnegie's whole thought was post-World War II was how did World War II happen? People were not educated enough. So he decided that he's going to put all this money into building libraries in these communities throughout the country, including the Argentine district, which is where our neighborhood of Kansas City, Kansas. And I'll tell you that had an immense, impact for us because in a small house we had one bathroom with a ringer-style washer, no dryer, and we slept dormitory-style, all the kids. There just wasn't a lot of room. So we would either go out and play or we'd go to the library and we'd read books. And that was true for all my siblings. And that's when in the heat of the summer when it was too hot to play, we went there. That was our go-to. And I think everybody in my family is really grateful that there was a Carnegie Library there that enabled people in our neighborhood, and especially us, to take advantage of the books because that just can't be underscored in terms of how, important it was to our being able to do well in school. I mean, that reading was important.
Our daughters did the same thing, and Shannon, my wife, would call the librarian and say, send the girls home. It's time for dinner.
That's exactly it. Well, my mom knew where we were. She knew where we were, and then we volunteered. We'd help the librarian. We'd read to the young kids and the whole thing. So then we'd do things with the Parks and Recreation Service. But, those kind of services are really important. And I think that's why, there's a lot of reasons why. My parents were probably a really critical part of it. We pursued, all of us were kind of in the public service arena now.
Sure.
Because we're very grateful for what we were given.
My motivation for law school was the same as yours. It was the only thing that I could think of after an extended collegiate career that lasted 11 years, as it was told, was that it was the one thing I knew that I could do that would permit me to do what I wanted to do. That I didn't have to be employed by somebody else, that there was always a way with a law degree that would give me an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I think your motivation was dead on there as well.
Yeah.
Well then, finished law school.
Finished law school, and so my sister Janet went to Washington, D.C. I went to Kansas City. I had been externing at the DA's office in Wyandotte County, which is Kansas City, Kansas. I had worked as a summer job in the criminal division of the district court there. That's what they call the state court as well, as a file clerk. And so I got to see all the files when I was in a starting post. Once I was in college, and read the cases. I got to know some of the DAs who come and file their cases, the defense attorneys who would come and do things, and then I got to, in my break, my 15-minute morning break, I'd get to go see the trial and everything. So I really was interested in the DA's office, And I took a lot of classes. I did a lot of the practical courses in terms of the advocacy courses at law school. And I got hired in the DA's office in Kansas City, Kansas.
Now you got a full-paying job.
It's a
Life
full-paying
takes on
job. Full-paying job, $18,000 a year. That was my salary.
Wow.
That was in 1985.
Oh, well, pretty nifty salary. Yeah, I started out.
How's it compare?
I started out at 600. I think I got the highest paying job of all of my class in law school.
You
They
did.
had gone to work for law firms, and law firms in those days paid pittance to
Yeah.
hire young associates.
Yeah.
But I got a job with the Arizona Attorney General and got a really decent salary at that point.
Yeah. What year was that, PG?
That was 1963.
Yeah. So about 20 years later, it was
Right.
quite an increase. But compared to what all my friends were making, it was pretty low.
Right.
But it didn't, to me, I never was about the salary. It was about the experience, and if I was really going to enjoy it, really be engaged in it, that was kind of more important to me. And so, I, worked there, and it was a great experience. I've loved every job I've ever had, and I hope other people who you get oral history from are able to say that to you. But that first job as an ADA, working in Kansas City in my hometown basically, which was large enough that, you met a lot of new people, you got to see how things worked and, what was happening. It was exciting, it was interesting, I was learning a lot. The judges were characters and, and mentors, I mean the whole gamut. And it was really a wonderful experience. I got a lot of great trial experience. My DA, my boss, who I worked for, he was a little conservative in that all the women got all the cases involving crimes against women and children. He just thought it would be better if they could talk to women, and I understand that at all. But the result of that is a lot of those cases go to trial. So I got a lot of trial experience very quickly. So then I was getting all these other cases, homicide. I was 2 years in, and I'm doing all these homicide cases and arguing my cases before the Court of Appeals, before the Supreme Court. I had some really novel issues.
And you took your own cases on appeal.
Took your own cases on appeal and wrote them. And I tell people, and it's true, when you write your own appeal and you have to defend your mistakes, that you make, and you do make mistakes, hopefully they're not critical, but you do make mistakes. If you have to defend them, you tend not to make those, again. And it was a great learning experience. I got to argue before our Kansas Supreme Court a number of times, and on some really novel issues. I had the first marital rape case in the state of Kansas. I had some other really novel issues in sexual assault cases. Battered woman syndrome was being, debated, and whether or not we should, have that as a potential defense, or the whole thing. DNA was just evolving. It was pre-DNA when I started, and then by the time I left, it was just emerging, and it's a really interesting time,
Yes.
for that. So then I got hired in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona.
I had the first DNA case in the Ninth Circuit.
Yes, because I had just started at the U.S. Attorney's Office, PG.
And how did that happen with the U.S. Attorney?
I had looked around in the Kansas City metropolitan area. There's a Missouri side and a Kansas side of the Kansas City area. You could just walk over the state line. But they weren't really hiring. I worked with some FBI agents on some task force cases and AUSAs, and I thought that might be a logical next step. But they didn't have any openings, and a good friend of mine was moving to Arizona. She was working at a big firm in New York at LaBeouf Lamb, and then she met a young man in Arizona. She was engaged, and she was going to be moving to Arizona. She said, I think they're hiring in the U.S. Attorney's Office here. Why don't you send your resume? So I sent it in. And interestingly, Steve McNamee, the Honorable Steve McNamee, was U.S. Attorney at that time. And I was one of his last hires before he became district court judge.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Hawkins my friend went to the firm where Mike Hawkins was working. I think it was Brian Cave at the time, maybe. I don't remember. It was a firm.
I think so.
Yeah, and he heard that she had a friend who was coming from Kansas looking for a job, and he wrote a letter of recommendation for me. And so it's quite remarkable that Mike took this risk on me. He took a chance on me in writing this letter of recommendation, and I ended up getting his seat on the Ninth Circuit.
Sure.
So, I mean, if we're talking historical
Yes, right.
ironics, sort of.
Turns of
Yes.
life.
So both Steve McNamee and Michael I consider, mentors, and I respect greatly, both of them. Not just for their professionalism and legal acumen, but because of how considerate they are, and how always both of them helping others and young people and trying to build up, the level of professionalism in the legal practice in Arizona.
So remind me, what year was that?
That would have been in 1990 when I moved to Arizona.
Mm-hmm. And you started right out given
Yes.
a full caseload?
Full caseload, appearing before you and all your colleagues at the time. That would have been Judge Broomfield, obviously, and I still had cases in front of Judge Strand, of course, and then, but I'm trying to think of, Mickey had just left. He was there, but he wasn't taking a lot of cases at the time. And I can't think of the other two right now, but anyhow.
Anyway.
So, yeah.
It was a small court.
Yeah, it was a small court at that time, and then, so I had all these great opportunities, working at the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was, and Arizona was wonderful. I've loved it every minute of my time in Arizona.
And how long then did you work as an assistant?
Well, 10
US
years.
attorney?
So, and I was a line assistant, and then I became a supervisor. Janet Napolitano became U.S. Attorney, and she gave me a position of criminal deputy chief, supervising the violent crime section at the time. It's interesting because the Oklahoma bombing case happened while I was supervising the violent crime section, and I don't know how many people remember, but Tim McVeigh was living in Kingman when the Oklahoma bombing happened, and he was on his way back. It looked like he was on his way back to Kingman when he was stopped by the trooper for his tail light or license plate, and that's when they found some evidence that then they pursued and found out that he was linked to the Oklahoma bombing. But supervising that section, Tom Hannes was my criminal chief. You remember Tom? And it was just overwhelming. I mean, we just all of a sudden, from that point forward, from that case forward, it was the Violent Crime and Terrorism Unit,
Yes.
And we had all this convergence of FBI and search warrants and subpoenas, and actually Merrick Garland, who is now has been nominated and is awaiting see what happens as a Supreme Court justice, was the point person that DOJ put at the time, who was going to take over that case and lead the prosecution or the investigation of that case. And so I met Merrick Garland back then, and we had some AUSAs, Joe Welty, Pete Jaros, I don't know if you remember some of these names.
Sure.
We're on that case with Tom, and so it was a wild time. We issued a lot of subpoenas, and we're working on search warrants and working with the agents, following up on investigative leads, because his two co-conspirators were living in Kingman at the time, and they ended up taking deals. But so anyhow, that was an interesting case, one of many, one of many that I had. And then in 1998, I was asked to go to Washington D.C. to Main Justice to work on violent crime policy
Yes, I recall
issues.
that.
So I'd gotten
Another great experience.
It was a wonderful experience. I'd done a lot in Indian country, setting up these task force to try to streamline and hopefully help investigate, and hopefully with the least re-victimization possible of the victims in child abuse cases, incorporate some of the practices that I had incorporated back in Kansas City, actually. I'd worked a lot in Indian country. There was some gang things and drug things that I'd been working on, and so when they were working up a crime bill, Janet Napolitano offered me up to go back to D.C. To work on violent crime policy, so that whoever was writing whatever law that might end up being actual law, that it have a practical sense to it, that they could talk to people from the field and know how things worked. And so it was a real honor and pleasure to get that opportunity. I did that, and after a little bit of time there, Ms. Reno, who was the Attorney General at the time, asked me if I would head this office and become the director of the Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, which is the liaison office between the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, and all of the field of the 92 U.S. Attorneys offices.
Fabulous exposure.
It was wonderful, and I had a whole Janet Reno in high regard. I feel like I've had some really strong mentors. She's one of them. Janet Napolitano was really helpful and extremely knowledgeable, and I learned a lot from her. And so, it was a great experience, and it was while I was there working in Washington, D.C., that I got the phone call from Senator Kyle and Congressman Pastor asking if I would consider becoming a district court judge.
And it took you how long to make that choice?
As you know, PG, that's not something, it's just it caught me off guard because I did not anticipate that. I was trying to, people I knew who were very accomplished lawyers I thought would be really good judges. I was back at Main Justice, and I'd go to some of the meetings, and I'd say, hey, you'd really need to look at, Virginia Mathis, or you need to look at this person, and, they would be really good judges. And then all of a sudden I get this call, and I'm like, wow. And so, yeah, it was a remarkable offer.
Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, it's an intense process. I had to meet with the DOJ people who I was working with on other issues, but then all of a sudden they're like, well, now you're a candidate, and so you have to go through this rigorous process and at the same time try to do your job, which was pretty, there's a lot to
life goes on.
Yes.
The process may stop,
Yes.
but the life goes on.
Because when I was there, Columbine happened. We had the Elian Gonzalez incident. There was just that you deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office and being the liaison and trying to help smooth things out between the department and the U.S. Attorney's Office. So there was a lot going on at that time. And meanwhile, I'm going through the process. You get scrubbed pretty closely and well, and but I made it through. Jim Tealberg and Susan Bolton were also nominated, and the three of us went through and were confirmed in October of 2010.
And that was
October of 2000. I'm thinking of
right, 2000.
2000.
But that demonstrated a remarkable compromise, that there is a way to make these appointments if people are willing to work together.
Well, you're right, because Jim was a Republican, I was a Democrat. Jim Tealberg was a Republican, I was a Democrat. Susan Bolton was a registered independent.
Right.
And
I bet there aren't too many circumstances where that combination has ever played out.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
And the three of us went through, and we got through, and we were confirmed, like I said, in October. And it's been a really, it's a privilege, and it's a wonderful experience, to be able to say, and to say that you survived the confirmation process, and you're a district court judge of the United States, for the District of Arizona. But it was even more special that I was able to share that experience with my now very dear friends, Jim Tealberg and Susan Bolton.
And what was it like going up on the bench for that first time?
It was the old building that I'd been prosecutor in the whole time, so which is now the bankruptcy court building. It's at, is it 230 First Avenue? Yeah. And just putting on the robe is something, you know, it just seems surreal. And then to go into court and to sit on the bench, and you feel like you're almost having an out-of-body experience, that you're seeing yourself from up here, and you know, it's a whole different vantage point, you know. And it reminded me of To Kill a Mockingbird, when, you know, Scout gets up on the porch of Boo Radley's house and talks about being, you know, in his shoes, you know, or experiencing things in somebody else's, you know, set of shoes. And I felt like I was on the porch of the bench, you know, just looking out and having a whole different perspective now. And it's been true. My experience as a district court, as a prosecutor or any litigator, you say your piece, you advocate, you hope, you know, you make your best argument possible with all the best authorities, and then you sit down. And then you get your pencil out and get ready to write on the file what the result is. And then when you're the judge, you know, both of the sides give you their best arguments, and then you have to decide. It's just starting at that point for you. And
they're both persuasive.
And they're both persuasive and difficult, sometimes challenging, as you well know. And, you know, you make the decision. So it's been remarkable.
And do you remember any cases that ring in your mind as those years as a district court judge?
Sure. You know, probably one that I just can't forget, and was probably one of the more significant cases that I presided over, was the first direct death case that we had in our district since EDPA had passed. And it was a carjacking case where this young man, he was a 19-year-old, but he was with a group of other people, had killed a grandmother and her granddaughter. It happened on the reservation and off the reservation, but on the reservation up in the Navajo. But they had committed the crime of carjacking, so the United States attorneys charged death penalty, a direct death, not a habeas case. And so that was a remarkable case. The facts were gruesome and awful, and he had a compelling story too. Picking the jury was the first time our court had done something like that in a while. Screening out for, you know, people who couldn't really sit on a death penalty case. It took us, I think, 6 weeks to pick a jury. And then we proceeded with the trial, and it was very well tried, interesting. I mean, a lot of motions and emotions for the people who were involved. The jury, you know, convicted. He, after the jury verdict came through, decided he didn't want to participate anymore. Which was, as a new judge, I'd been only on the court for a year. He decided, the defendant decided that he did not want to participate, so I had to figure out what to do, you know, and so we figured out that we should probably put a camera, you know, from the cell. He could look there and put a phone line for his attorney to talk to him. But I mean, these were things that you know, get prepared for either, you know, in law school, or you just kind of have to figure out what's fair. So it was a really difficult case, a challenging case, but the jury came back ultimately with death, and then I had the very somber responsibility of imposing a death sentence.
Tough.
Tough.
Yeah.
Tough.
I had to do that in state court several times, and the first time I went in and imposed the death penalty, I struggled my way through it and finally imposed the sentence, and then got up and walked out of the courtroom a bit choked. And the defendant looked at his lawyer and says, "What the hell's the matter with him?" Didn't bother him a bit.
No, it was hard because, you know, the juries, you know, they're just human beings too, and it's the beauty of our system that you get tried by your peers. but it's, people I think don't fully appreciate how important it is and how emotionally impactful it is for them, to sit on any case, but especially a death penalty case.
Right.
And they take their job seriously, which in my experience they do, then they feel the weight of the responsibility. And
Yes.
that's the way it should be.
Of course.
But to see it happen live, it's a tremendous privilege. To see how seriously they take their job, and so it's what distinguishes our country, though. And I wish people had that good experience just viewing what the jurors go through, and that's why I'm glad as many people as possible, report for their jury service.
Yeah, participate in the whole process.
Yeah.
I've never talked to a juror who didn't feel that they didn't gain something out of the process.
Mm-hmm. So.
Well, any other cases that pop into mind?
I had a really significant civil case, and I never thought in a million years that I would say that this patent case would be, so significant. But it was, because it was a really remarkable case. It had the longest history ever in the history of the patent office. And it was a battle over who invented vascular grafts. When you have something wrong with one of your veins or arteries, they'll go in and put in a vascular graft. It's a remarkable invention, and it has led to the, saving of limbs and lives, And the question whether was this doctor from Phoenix Heart Hospital was the inventor, or Gore from Northern Arizona. The Gore-Tex, has a company. It's really large. I didn't realize that they had a medical development company up in Northern Arizona, and it was a fight over who actually should be deemed the inventor of that vascular graft. And it was interesting on a lot of levels. It was a very, a little bit complex patent case because it had the longest history ever of the patent office. But I have to tell you, the lawyering was some of the best that I'll ever witness. Both sides were exceptional, and when you have a case like that where you have the lawyers, they're working hard, they're very good. It's a joy.
Truly a joy.
Even though it's stressful, there's a lot of work,
Right.
Things that I had to figure out for the first time. They're the experts in this area, but for them to be able to basically convey their point and teach at the same time to me and to the jury,
Sure.
it's a remarkable thing to witness, and I feel really privileged to have had to preside over it. It was hard fought, it was lengthy, but it was also very significant in the outcome.
Very challenging. That's why I'm still in the full draw on intellectual property cases.
Yes, so those two probably, I think, as a district court judge, have to.
So another change in your career takes place.
Yes.
And how does this come about?
I was sitting at my desk working, and I got a call from the White House this time, saying, we're looking at you, and we'd like to know if you'd consider being a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge. And I was just like, wow, who is this?
Yeah, right.
Calling. And so it was the people in the White House, and so they're working with, senators and Senator Kyle, and wanted to know if that would be possible and if I would consider it. And again, I suppose you could say no, but it's really hard. And I really could have. I could have said no, but I had been doing, I had the privilege of getting the district court judgeship at a fairly early age. I was 40 when I got the district court judgeship, and I had been doing it for 9 to 10 years. And I had to think if I wanted the next 15 years to continue being a district court, if a judge, or if I wanted to experience something new and different at the circuit level. And I thought, well, it's interesting work. I think I would like to do something a little different. And I got to be honest, I think, I think it's important for people with my background to have those positions. And so I thought, I don't think I can say no.
And so it was easy to say yes.
Yes.
Tell us about that process. Was this easier or more complicated?
Well, this is 10 years later, so now the process has gotten more intense every year, I think, for confirmation. And even though I didn't have any big issues, it's not easy ever, I don't think, anymore. And there's always going to be, something, and just the scrutiny, especially with the Ninth Circuit. I think there's a special scrutiny there. But I felt like I had done my job and done the best I could at the district court, same as the time before. And so it took about 10 months from nomination to confirmation, but going through the hearings. But nothing, I think I didn't have anything too complicated or controversial. And so I was able to get through. I had the support of my senators, and I think it was helpful that I'd gotten along so well with my colleagues at the district court.
We were all very proud of
and
you. Still are.
So I appreciate that, and I think they put in good words for me. It's interesting because come from very different backgrounds, but I think there's we have a very collegial bench, and it came through for me, because I suppose people could sit silent. You hear other stories about other, cultures in other districts, and I feel so proud to come from the District of Arizona.
And when were you confirmed?
In December of 2010.
Tell us about this job, and how does it differ, and what are the challenges that make a difference in judging?
It's a fundamentally different job. You have to decide with two other people. So when you write something, you have to, it's not your pure writing often. You have to make sure everybody's on board, and so it affects, what your decision would be otherwise, or how it would come out. But you're not there on the ground. You're not seeing everything firsthand. You're reading about it. I'm so glad to have had the experience of being a district judge, and actually a litigator as a prosecutor before that. I think it's informed me, and it's helped me on making the decisions that I make here. I appreciate that we're the last stop at the circuit level. Because obviously the Supreme Court is the ultimate last stop, but they don't have to take all the cases. We do. So if there's going to be any error, if it needs to be found, it needs to be found either as it gets to us or by the time, or when we get it at the circuit. And so there's a huge level of responsibility, but it's a little different. We're more looking rather than reacting as immediately as you do on the district court. And I think it's the way it's supposed to be. The district court does the best they can with their resources and everything, and I think most of the time they get it right. Every once in a while, there's going to be error, and that's our job, is to find it. That's the way it's supposed to work. It'd be great, but it's we're all human. It's a human process, and human beings behind it, and it's the way it should be, and but it's a very different job. But I think they're all every level is of equal importance.
Because the Ninth Circuit is so large, and because the caseload is so heavy, you're dealing with different judges, often with district court judges by appointment.
By designation.
So the panels are changing continually. this could be very complicated and difficult with as many judges as participate. Tell us a little bit about that process, if you.
Well, the backlog, because of the volume, is does weigh on the court. I think we, by our numbers, could have 10 more judges easily, but and we're at 28. But the number of cases, the population we have in our circuit, easily would allow for 10 more judges. So we have to deal with that huge volume, and it's a challenge. And so, all the judges are working very hard to address that. And really, once we get the case, we decide them. I mean, 90% of the cases are decided, I would bet, within 2 weeks to 4 weeks at the most. And they're decided. Some of the more complicated, sometimes high-profile cases will take a little bit longer, probably as they should, because people are, weighing in, taking everything into account and trying to turn everything around as soon as possible. But it's going to, because it goes through 3 different chambers, and it takes a little longer. But I'm proud of that statistic, that once we touch it, once we actually get it on a panel, the turnaround is pretty quick. The problem is the backlog from making sure that
getting it to argument.
Getting into argument, right. So that's a challenge. We're doing everything we can. We do oral screening panels. We, sit on motions. We're, working very hard. And that's probably, I'm so impressed, because sometimes we submit cases without oral argument, and sometimes we have oral argument. But whether we submit them or we hear it, I am so impressed at the level of review that is given to each case that comes in. 3 chambers look at that case very carefully. Even though it may appear like straightforward or whatever, some people might say, "Oh, that's straightforward." Well, we look at it, and we've got law clerks. You're looking at it, and the amount of review and dedication and care for each case that comes in. I wish the public could really see and appreciate that, the level of work and review that goes into each case.
Hard to explain.
It's hard to explain, because sometimes what the public will see, or what the litigant will see, and the party, is just that it came, it was submitted, and we decided it. But just everybody has a very careful, thoughtful approach. No matter how straightforward it might seem. And then, if it's not straightforward, everybody's looking at it. And I have come to appreciate, initially it's hard, because you come from the district court. It's like, I've decided I'm ready to move on, let's go. And I was like, oh, 2 other people, they haven't decided yet, because I'm done.
Right.
And you're just like, but I come to really appreciate, the help in resolving a really complicated, difficult issue. It's a really, it's a process that I think, when you think what the founders, had in mind, they'd be really proud to see that it has been sustained over this time period, and that it works. Because when you have 3 dedicated, jurists looking over and seeing, well, what's the right result here in terms of the law and the facts, and all working to achieve that, and then you get the result. It's really a beautiful process.
It is indeed. You've mentioned that it's the court of last resort for most appeals, but often, because of unbanked decisions, or without unbanked decisions, they've gone on to the Supreme Court. Do you have any cases that have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court of monumental or significance that you felt
I've had
addressed?
Couple of cases that have gone to the Supreme Court that I've authored, but they've either sent it back, or it's been part of other cases that they have considered. Nothing truly of significance at this point. I've been on for about 5 years.
I was on the panel with a case that Ray Fisher authored in just this last term on Dietz versus Bolden, where they the Supreme Court just decided this session where they decided that once a jury, they've disbanded, if you can pull them back in and you can poll them and find out that they haven't talked to other people, you can continue the trial. The question should be, once they're discharged, is it over? Or if you can catch them before they leave the courthouse, is that? And we kind of, I used my practical sort of approach to it, both as a litigator and as a district court judge. Well, I think I'd want to defer to the district court judge if he thinks that, they haven't been tainted by anything, and he can ask the questions surrounding that rather than start the trial all over again, then pick up, because the judge in that case ended up missing something on the jury verdict form. So did the lawyers. And it came back a verdict that was kind of an impossible verdict. And so they needed to clarify and clean that up. And rather than say, oh, okay, we got to start the trial all over again, I doubt that will happen much, but I was glad to contribute to that decision of the circuit, and the Supreme Court affirmed, and I think it was the right result.
Reversed or affirmed, do you still feel that you've made a contribution
Yeah.
in the whole process, don't you?
Yes, and it's when you ask me, the difference between the district court and the circuit, there are differences. At the district court, you see the impact of your decision right away. You feel it, you see it, it's right there. You're sentencing people routinely. You're making decisions on discovery. You're making decisions on summary judgment motions and dismissals of cases. And so you miss that immediate sort of, result, or you kind of, that was, something that was very true for the district court experience. But I've come to appreciate at the circuit, when you're on a panel and it's a constitutional question, or it's just a question that, you need to clarify the law about, and you have the assignment to write for the panel or for the en banc panel, you write for the whole circuit. And I think that seems kind of obvious, but when you're like me, coming from the district court to the circuit, and you see that you wrote a decision that, the 9 Western states are going to follow because you wrote it in opinion, that's powerful.
Well, you're a young woman, relatively speaking, and certainly compared to this old dog. But who knows what future brings for you?
Well,
will you stand in line for Chief Judge of the 9th? Is that possible under the?
I'm the next in line, PG.
Oh, are you really? Holy smoke! I had no idea.
I mean, Lord willing, and all.
Congratulations on
Thanks.
that.
Yeah.
How about that? I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, if it, how it works. I mean, if Chief Judge Thomas stays for the 6 or 7 years, then I would be the next in line.
Mm-hmm.
So
We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Yeah.
How nice of you to give us your time, Judge Murguia. You've had a fascinating career, and you have a fascinating future. Anything that I may have missed out that you'd like to tell the folks before we?
Well, 2 things, if you don't mind. I know we've been going at it here for a little bit. One is, we started talking about my parents. I'd like to end talking about my parents if I can, because each of these phases, the district court judgeship, you just thought, wow, how is that possible, for people with very few resources that my parents had come to this country and see their children, achieve these, positions of such responsibility. Because my brother Carlos is a district court judge in Kansas. He was the first Latino to be appointed a state court judge there, and the first Latino to be a federal district court judge in Kansas. We're the only brother-sister combination in the country. My sister Janet is the president and CEO of the largest Hispanic civil rights group in the country, the National Council of La Raza. She worked for 5 years in the Clinton administration. She was deputy director of Ledge Affairs. because of her, my parents were able to go to the White House, meet the then president in the Oval Office. And then my brother Ramon just recently was appointed in January to be the chair of the Board of Trustees for the Kellogg Foundation. He's the first Latino to serve on that board. He's really done a lot with philanthropy, and he started the Kansas City Hispanic Scholarship Fund for kids in the Kansas City metropolitan area. They have over a $3 million endowment now. And last year they gave over $300,000 in scholarships to Latino kids to go to school.
Unbelievable.
And so I want to end with that because my parents and my family, what the model that they gave us, the American dream has come true for me, and I think for my parents too, even though they sacrificed a great deal. But I've seen the American dream happen, and I see it every day, and my siblings and I are very grateful for the positive example. Despite the tremendous sacrifices, because there were challenges and sacrifices, that my parents had such a positive outlook and were not taken down and didn't succumb to a negative sort of vision of the world, of the country. They knew in this country, if you were given a fair level playing field, that you could succeed. And I'm really grateful to them. And so any oral history, I wanted to make sure that I expressed my appreciation to them and my other siblings too, even though they didn't become lawyers. 4 of us became lawyers. They've done really well. And my oldest sister Martha, is mentally challenged, but she worked for over 30 years at a restaurant complex in Kansas City. And probably all of us are most proud of her because she probably had to work harder to do what she did than we did. But so I wanted to say that because this is a remarkable country when you think about it. 2 very humble people from Mexico came here and built a life and built a family, sacrificed much, all for the stated purpose of their kids and hopefully giving their kids a better opportunity. And then I hope that people will see that because of that and because of our gratitude, we've chosen these lives of public service where hopefully we can somehow pay back what we've been given. And then finally, I just want to tell you what a privilege it is to have this interview, to be part of the series of oral histories for Arizona. I came here in 1990. That may not sound like a very long time ago to some people, but it changed my life for the better. I had a great life then, but it's been so wonderful, the state and the people in particular, and I feel particularly privileged to be interviewed by you, PG. Thank you.
I feel a kindred relationship with you because I feel I have lived the American dream as well. There are many similarities, if in a different context, that my family experienced. But having said all that, I would like to raise a toast to the magnificent Murguias.
Thank you very much.